Welcome, friend, to Life and Liberty Radio. I'm David Householder, here to encourage your pursuit of happiness. You and I are partners, exploring our shared spiritual journeys. Together, we're dreaming and working for a free society. Tell others today about our adventure in faith and freedom. So breathe in, open your mind, lift up your spirit. Let's get started. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is transportation. I've been obsessed with transportation since I was a little kid. I almost wore out my Schwinn Continental, which was pretty much indestructible. Put so many miles on that thing. I love to move around. I love to travel. I love to see things. And there's a demand on the part of people to move, to go places, to see things, to pick things up, to transport things around, to go with people, to go visit people, to see things. It's to get to work, to get back from work, to get to church, to get to school, all of those different things. So transportation is key. And in a country like the United States, which is grossly underpopulated, and if you don't believe me, get a window seat and fly across the country, transportation is a big deal. To be able to get out and see people is of just ultimate importance because we're so spread out compared to most of the world where people can walk around and pretty much see the people they need to see. They're in villages. They're in ancient neighborhoods where the human scale is a lot more important. We settled a continent, for goodness sake, in big townships with mile-square patchwork quilts that you see from the air. So transportation and communication have always been very important for us. But the truth is we're doing a really bad job of transportation right now because we're trying to do it through central planning. And if you're a stats guy like me, I looked at a map just yesterday of how things get transported in the United States by tonnage all the way across the United States. And it's fascinating to see this massive dark colors going from Wyoming and Montana to Kansas City, where everything fans out from there. That's where the coal fields are in Montana and Wyoming, and the rail lines fan out from Kansas City. I didn't know that. Much of our freight goes through there, but having driven through Kansas City, sure, there's rail yards everywhere. That's why that's the case. There's the Mississippi River, which carries a ton of tonnage, so to speak. And certain interstate highways are very, very busy, especially ones going from the Southwest up into the Midwest. But a lot of our interstate highways are almost unused altogether. Well, why? Because we centrally planned them and put them everywhere, whether or not they needed to be there. There's highways going across Montana where you never see another car, and it's 4-lane interstate. So we really haven't planned things very well. And what I'd like to do is draw your attention to Bangkok, to the Bangkok SkyTrain, because I think people are starting to get it right. It's called the Rot Phai Pha, the BTS SkyTrain. And Bangkok is one of the most crowded cities in the world. If you've been to Southeast Asia, as I have, driving through the cities with a taxi is just about impossible. To get to the airport if you're in a hurry is just it practically give you an aneurysm. Seriously, it's unbelievably congested. So they thought, what should we do about this? And the government does what the government always does. It's subsidized, get this, subsidized automobile consumption. Why? Who knows? But in any case, they did, and they wanted to build more freeways and highways, which they did, all of which caused, you got it, more congestion. Exactly. And then people are like, well, let's build public transportation. Well, public transportation is outrageously expensive. Look at the Washington, D.C. Metro or the BART or the Atlanta system, the newer ones like these three. And they're outrageously expensive. Minneapolis put a train from the Mall of America to the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport to downtown Minneapolis, outrageously expensive per mile, and it doesn't even carry anywhere near the ridership of the typical trolleys that used to run on that. For the cost to put up was almost nothing. So we really don't think it through. We don't think in terms of cost. We don't think in terms of profit. And our two forms of transportation, publicly funded public transportation, or on the other hand, you get publicly subsidized automobile traffic. You say, well, that's private. That's not public. It's very public. Much money, billions get spent on highways and freeways and repair. And so it's subsidized. It's subsidized. That road you're riding on is one of the most expensive things that your taxes pay for, that you actually get some benefit from. But the truth is those freeways are built in such a way, they're designed by committee, much like the interstate system itself, that they don't respond to the needs and the demands of traffic because they're centrally planned and there's no bottom line. There's no sense of profitability to them. There's no sense of ridership demand or anything like that. And so you end up with clogged freeways all over Los Angeles where I live, and it's just unbelievably bad. So the BTSC, which is a company, Bangkok Transit System Corporation, did something. I caught this in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. They did an IPO. They offered stock. Well, if they offer stock, that must be it's a private corporation. And $2.13 billion flooded into the BTSC because everyone wants to invest in it. Invest in it. Is this a private train? Yes, it is. It's a private SkyTrain, which they've already got 2 lines running. They're going to extend it. And, of course, they need some cooperation for the government for right-of-way and property issues, and they need to be able to condemn land here and there and use some public domain. But it's being built by a private corporation. And they're complaining that in the first few years of running it, they were only a little bit profitable, and they weren't able to pay back some of the capital of the construction as they had hoped. Can you imagine? Can you imagine an American public transportation company saying, we were just a little bit profitable? Not even close to profitable. It's a huge drain on our tax system the way we do it here. And our first trains, our best train systems in the United States, New York and Chicago and some other places, were actually private trains. And they started with elevated trains, just like in Bangkok, because it's easier to do legally and otherwise and not nearly as expensive as a subway. Elevated trains, imagine that. It works really, really well. And the whole idea, of course, of the monorails was that would happen. And everyone thought in the early 60s that would happen. And the Alweg Company and the World's Fair in Seattle and Disneyland and all that came to Los Angeles and said, just like BTSC, we will build a monorail system throughout the area. All you got to do is let us do it. We'll operate it at a profit, and eventually we'll pay back the capital. And we're going to fund it with private investments, just like BTSC. And LA said no. And the result is the traffic that you see. So what I'd like to invite you to do is get out of your thinking that things either have to be freeways or outrageously expensive and inefficient public transportation. I look at the public transportation in Los Angeles, which was put together at huge costs, absolutely ginormous costs. It's pretty new, hasn't been around for very long, all public. And I've never seen the trains full. I go by and there's a few people on them and a few people waiting at the stops. And they don't really go where they need to go, and they don't connect people in the major commuting lines as they should. And it's badly planned. Whereas Southern California used to have the best mass transit system in the world, called the Red Lines. And the Red Lines were profitable, and they were low emission, and they were fast. And think about it. Elevated trains, monorails, those kinds of things which aren't as expensive as subways. And eventually, if they're profitable enough, they can build the subways themselves. The whole idea here is that we move away from public transportation or freeways to a new era of thinking, and that's the era of private mass transit. Private mass transit will always be cleaner, faster, greener, cheaper, and more profitable than anything else, and it will actually be built where people want to go. I remember when I was at my college, they reseeded the entire lawn. So the whole quad, it's a small college, and they ripped the whole thing up and they reseeded it with grass. And they waited then to see, once the grass grew back, where people walked. And they put the sidewalks there. What a great idea. So wherever it got worn out, that's where they put the sidewalks. Think about how smart that is. That's how the private sector works with transportation. The public sector would come up with a master plan and tell people where to walk, and they wouldn't go there. So all this happened. We had private transportation in our cities up until 1913, the year everything went wrong. income tax, the Federal Reserve Bank, Wilson, my bête noire, my least favorite president. I've done a podcast on him. You need to pay attention to that. He set up the Federal Public Railways Commission in order to, quote, this is hilarious, return them to profitability. As if a public organization has ever returned a private organization to profitability. That reminds me of my 1967 or so Weekly Reader, or whenever it was, late 60s, when they talked about Amtrak, how it was going to come together and it was going to return these rails to profitability. Well, the truth is the rails were being beaten out by subsidized public freeways, which were outrageously expensive, and they created some of the worst smog in the country. So you think about government regulating the air so that we can breathe better. They're the ones who caused the smog in the first place. And so this happened because the federal government started in 1913 taking over the public trains. In 1947, the CTA in Chicago was formed. In 1953, New York made public, took over, socialized the railroads, and things started heading south absolutely from there. Almost everything froze in time, and the transit lines went from tax-paying corporations to drains on the tax system. So good for you, Bangkok. Way to go. Hope to ride the Rot Phai Pha, the SkyTrain, sometime soon. And boy, I'll tell you, you guys have done a lousy job in Bangkok. You're just profitable, and you haven't even paid back your capital yet. Well, that's going to happen, and we're proud of you, and you are the way to go forward. BTSC, 2.13 billion IPO, sold out in no time. Well, that's all for today on Life and Liberty Radio. Thanks so much for sharing this part of your spiritual journey with me. Now, the views on this program are not necessarily those of my advertisers, sponsors, places I work or do business with. They're purely my own, but I'm sharing them with you, so share your ideas with me. Write me on Twitter at Liberty House, LIBERTYHOUS, no E. Until next time, let's continue dreaming and working for a free and spiritually grounded society.